Hey, everyone. I've been lurking here for a while, but today I feel like it's time to share my story. To be honest, I never thought I'd be in this position, writing out my life's drama for strangers on the internet, but here I am. My name's Ethan. I'm 36, and my wife, Jessica, is 34. We've been together for over a decade now, married for 8 years. On the surface, everything was great. I mean, we had our typical ups and downs like any couple, but overall, I thought we were solid. That's what makes all of this even more gut-wrenching. Looking back, maybe there were signs. Small things that seemed insignificant at the time but now seem like red flags I ignored. Jessica was always good at getting what she wanted, whether it was a raise at work, a favor from a friend, or a last-minute weekend trip. She was the type of person you didn't want to cross, but I admired that about her, her drive, her independence. But about 6 months ago, things started to change. She became distant, a little colder. I'd brush it off as her being tired from work. She's in a high-stress job in corporate law, and we'd always been pretty understanding of each other's schedules. But this was different. She started hiding her phone, locking it more often, spending more time out with friends, or at the office. Still, I told myself it was just my imagination running wild. I didn't want to be that guy, you know. The one who becomes paranoid for no reason, accusing his wife of things without evidence. I guess that's what held me back from confronting her earlier. I trusted her. I trusted us. But that trust, well, it's the reason I'm here now, telling this story. Alright, back again with part 2. Things really started to go downhill a couple of months after I first noticed the distance between us. It wasn't anything major at first, just little moments that started stacking up in my mind. You know that gut feeling you get when something just isn't right? That was me, constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I was just being paranoid. One night, Jessica told me she had to work late again. Nothing unusual about that, her job was demanding, and late nights were part of the deal. But this time, something in the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her eyes didn't meet mine, and she was more rushed than usual. I let it slide, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. That evening, I was home alone, flipping through the TV channels, trying to distract myself. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Jessica wasn't responding to my texts, which wasn't like her. She always made a point to check in, even if she was swamped with work. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from a buddy of mine, Ryan. He's the kind of friend who always knows what's going on in everyone's life, whether they want him to or not. His message was casual at first, asking how things were. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Hey, man. Is Jess working late? Thought I saw her with someone at that new bar downtown." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. My mind went blank for a second before the questions flooded in. Who was she with? Why hadn't she mentioned anything about going out? I didn't respond to Ryan right away. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. She could have been with a colleague, right? Maybe a work meeting. But then why wouldn't she tell me? I texted her, something simple, "How's work going? You alright?" But I didn't get a reply for another hour. When she finally did respond, it was vague, "Yeah, just really busy. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." For the first time, I felt that familiar foundation of trust start to crack. The pit in my stomach was growing, but I still didn't have anything concrete. Just doubt. Looking back now, that moment was the turning point. It was the first real sign that everything wasn't as it seemed. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. After that message from Ryan, I couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at me. It was like a shadow lurking in the back of my mind, whispering that things weren't what they seemed. But I was still holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. A few days later, Jessica came home late again. She seemed off. Her energy was different, like she was present, but her mind was somewhere else. We had dinner, but she barely spoke, and when she did, it was just small talk, work, how her day was, the usual. But there was no warmth. No real connection. That night, as she was showering, I did something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed her phone. Now, before you judge me, let me just say, I'm not proud of it. I always believed that if you're snooping around in your partner's phone, you've already lost the battle. But there I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone in my hands, debating whether or not to unlock it. I knew her passcode, of course. We never kept things like that from each other, or at least, we didn't used to. My hands were shaking as I entered the code and started scrolling. At first, there was nothing. No suspicious texts, no weird calls. I started to breathe a little easier, telling myself I was just being paranoid. And then I found it. It wasn't in her messages or call logs. It was in her emails, a series of messages with a subject line that simply read, "Client meetings." But when I opened them, I quickly realized these weren't work emails. They were personal. They were with someone named Alex, and the tone of them was intimate. Not outright sexual, but definitely not professional. One message caught my eye immediately. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Let's do it again soon." My heart stopped. I felt this cold wave wash over me as I read and reread the words. It felt like a punch to the gut. All the suspicions, all the doubts, they weren't just in my head. There was something going on, and it wasn't innocent. I put her phone back where I found it, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't just confront her, not yet. I needed to know more. But at that moment, everything I thought I knew about my marriage started to unravel. I sat there in the dark, the sound of the shower running in the background, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Who was Alex? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I'll leave it here for now. I wasn't ready to confront her just yet, but the pieces were falling into place. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me in the process. So, after finding those emails, I was a mess. I couldn't just act like everything was fine, but I didn't want to confront Jessica without more proof. I needed something undeniable, something that would stop her from twisting the truth if she tried. I thought I'd be able to hold out and gather more evidence, but that didn't last long. A few days later, we were sitting in the living room watching TV. Well, I was watching TV, Jessica was glued to her phone, texting someone. I couldn't help but wonder if it was Alex. I was boiling inside but trying to stay calm. My mind kept replaying that email over and over. "Last night was amazing." Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. Something in me snapped. "Jess, who the hell is Alex?" I blurted out, my voice shaking. She froze. For a split second, she didn't move, didn't blink. And then, as if on cue, she turned to me with this confused, innocent expression, like I'd just asked her the most ridiculous question in the world. "What are you talking about?" she said, her tone calm but defensive. "I found your emails," I said, my voice growing louder. "I saw the messages between you and this Alex. So tell me, who is he?" She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "You went through my emails." Her voice was sharp, cutting. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she flipped it around, making me the bad guy for snooping. Classic move. "I didn't want to, but you've been acting so distant." I had to know what was going on. I shot back, not backing down. "So are you going to explain or not?" Jessica sighed, looking away like she was trying to gather her thoughts. I could see the wheels turning in her head, figuring out what to say next. And then, just like that, she shrugged. "He's just a guy from work," she said, her tone casual, like we were discussing the weather. "We went out for drinks a couple of times after meetings. That's it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's it?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" She rolled her eyes. "Ethan, you're overreacting. Nothing happened. We're just friends." My head was spinning. I wanted to believe her, but the emails, the way she looked at me right now, it didn't feel right. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I also felt helpless. She was too good at this, at playing it off like I was the one being unreasonable. "I saw the emails," I said quietly, barely holding myself together. "You don't talk to just friends like that." She sighed again, this time more frustrated. "Fine, yes, I flirted with him a little, but it was harmless. I swear to you, nothing happened. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Flirting? Harmless?" My head was spinning, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could she stand there and act like this was no big deal? Like I was crazy for feeling betrayed? "I don't even know who you are anymore," I muttered, more to myself than to her. Jessica walked toward me, her face softening. "Ethan, you're the one I love. You know that, right? I'm sorry if I crossed a line, but it's you I want. It's always been you." Her words were supposed to comfort me, but all I felt was emptiness. There was no warmth behind them, no real remorse. It was like she was just saying what she thought I needed to hear to calm down. And honestly, it worked. I was so desperate to believe her that I let it go, for the moment, at least. That night, I lay next to her in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to just brush it all aside and go back to the way things were. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After that confrontation, things between Jessica and me were tense, to say the least. I tried to push it down, to believe her when she said nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Every time she smiled at me, every time she touched me, it felt like a lie. Like there was something hiding behind her eyes that I couldn't reach. I started watching her more closely, where she went, who she talked to, how she acted around me. It wasn't just about the emails anymore. It was everything. Every detail became a clue in this puzzle I was desperately trying to piece together. That's when I decided I couldn't just take her word for it. If I wanted the truth, I had to get it myself. One night, while she was asleep, I got out of bed and grabbed her phone again. I know, I already said I wasn't proud of snooping, but at this point, I was losing my mind. I just needed something concrete. Something that would either prove I was wrong or confirm what I was starting to fear. Her phone was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. I went straight to her messages. Again, nothing. Nothing suspicious in her texts, nothing that would raise an eyebrow. But then I remembered something. A few days before, when I had been scrolling through her phone the first time, I noticed she had downloaded an app one didn't recognize, something for secure messaging. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now it felt like the missing piece. I opened the app and there it was, everything I had feared. Dozens of messages. Long conversations. And not just with Alex, but with a couple of other names I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the messages, each one more damning than the last. The things they talked about weren't just flirtations. It was intimate. Detailed. They talked about their nights together, where they had met, the things they had done. It was like a punch to the gut. Everything in me wanted to throw the phone across the room and scream, but I just sat there, numb. I read every single message, every little confession. I needed to feel the pain fully, to understand how far this had gone. And then, in one of the messages, Alex mentioned something that made my blood run cold, a weekend they spent together at a hotel. A weekend she had told me she was working late. She had lied to my face. Again and again. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. There it was, laid out in front of me, the full truth. Jessica hadn't just crossed a line. She had completely shattered everything we had built, everything I thought we were. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just lay there, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. The betrayal felt like it was suffocating me. How long had this been going on? How many times had she come home to me after being with him? How many lies had she told me to cover her tracks? The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her right away. I had already seen how easily she could twist things around, how she could make me feel like the crazy one. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed a plan. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of the messages, notes of dates and times when she had lied. I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next because I knew once I confronted her with this, there was no going back. But in the meantime, I started thinking. If she could betray me like this, if she could tear our marriage apart so easily, maybe I could take a page from her book. Maybe I didn't have to play by the rules anymore. There was a part of me, a dark, twisted part, that wanted revenge. I wasn't proud of it, but it was there, whispering in my ear. She had taken something from me, something I could never get back. Maybe it was time for me to take something from her. Here we are. The part where everything starts to spiral out of control. After finding those messages, I was a wreck. Every time I looked at Jessica, it was like there was this invisible wall between us, something she had built with every lie, every hidden text, every night she had spent with him. But instead of confronting her with the truth right away, I held back. I wasn't ready to blow everything up just yet. That dark thought I mentioned before. It kept growing. If she could cheat on me, break our vows like they meant nothing, then why should I be the one holding it all together? Why should I be the only one suffering in silence? I decided I was done being the nice guy. I had been faithful, loyal, and honest, and where did it get me? Betrayed. Used. So I made a choice. I was going to do something I never thought I would. Something that would make her feel the way I had been feeling for months now. There's this woman at my office, Rachel. She's beautiful, smart, and we've always gotten along well. There was never anything between us beyond friendly banter, but I could tell she was interested. And after everything I had been through with Jessica, I started to feel like, why not? Why shouldn't I take what's being offered to me? Jessica certainly hadn't hesitated. It started out simple enough. I invited Rachel to lunch one day, just to talk. But it didn't take long for things to shift. We talked about work at first, but soon, the conversation turned more personal. She asked me how my marriage was going, and before I knew it, I was spilling everything, about Jessica, about the cheating, about how lost and hurt I was. Rachel listened, her eyes full of sympathy and, something else. Something I hadn't seen in Jessica's eyes in a long time. It wasn't long before that lunch turned into more. I'm not going to get into graphic details, but let's just say things escalated quickly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control again. I wasn't just the guy who had been cheated on. I was the one making choices now. I was the one crossing the lines. And it felt good. I knew it wasn't the healthiest way to deal with my pain, but at the time, I didn't care. I told myself it was payback, that I was evening the score. I was getting something out of this mess that Jessica had created. But as satisfying as it was in the moment, there was this gnawing feeling in the back of my mind, the knowledge that things were about to get very, very messy. It didn't take long for Jessica to catch on. I wasn't as subtle as I thought I was. Maybe a part of me wanted her to know. Maybe I wanted her to feel the way I had felt, betrayed, blindsided. One night, she came home earlier than expected, and there I was, in our living room, with Rachel. Jessica's face when she walked in, it was like she had been hit by a truck. For a second, she just stood there, frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide as they darted between me and Rachel. And then the anger hit. I could see it building in her, like a storm ready to explode. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, her voice shaking with fury. I stood up, trying to act calm, like I had nothing to hide. "What do you think it is, Jess?" Rachel, to her credit, looked uncomfortable but didn't say a word. She quietly grabbed her things and left, leaving me alone to face Jessica's wrath. "You cheated on me?" she shouted, her voice cracking with disbelief. I couldn't help it, I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, though. It was bitter. Cold. "Yeah, Jess. How does it feel? How does it feel to be the one on the other side?" She stared at me, stunned, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. "What are you talking about? I never." "Don't even try it," I snapped, cutting her off. "I've seen the messages. I know about Alex. I know about everything." Her face went pale. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. But instead of admitting she was wrong, she went on the attack. "You went through my phone. You spied on me. Don't act like you're the victim here." I yelled, the anger boiling over. "You cheated on me first. You lied to me, you snuck around behind my back, and now you're mad because I finally did something for myself." Jessica stood there, speechless, her eyes burning with fury. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could see the gears turning in her head, like she was trying to figure out how to twist this situation to make me the bad guy, like she always did. But this time, she couldn't. Because I had her. I had the proof. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and cold. "You think this makes us even? You think sleeping with someone else fixes everything?" I shook my head, my voice calmer now. "No. But it sure as hell makes me feel less like the fool you've been treating me like." And that was it. She didn't have a response. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, wondering how the hell our marriage had turned into this. From the outside, I thought this would make me feel better. I thought revenge would give me some sense of satisfaction, but in that moment, watching her walk away, I realized something. We were both broken now. And neither of us was walking away from this unscathed. After Jessica stormed out that night, I sat there in the quiet of our empty house, feeling like I'd won, but only for a moment. The victory was hollow. I thought that sleeping with someone else, making Jessica feel that same pain, would somehow even the score. But as the adrenaline wore off, I was left with this gnawing emptiness inside me. I hadn't just destroyed her trust, I'd destroyed a part of myself in the process. The next few days were tense, to say the least. Jessica stayed out late, sometimes not coming home at all. I knew she was trying to make me worry, make me question where she was, who she was with, just like I had done to her. But I was past that. She could have been with Alex or someone else, and it wouldn't have mattered anymore. I was numb to it. One evening, after days of silence, Jessica finally came home, her face set in a cold, hard mask. She didn't say a word as she walked into the living room where I was sitting. For a second, I thought she might just ignore me again, but then she turned, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We need to talk." I nodded, already knowing this conversation was going to be brutal. "Yeah, we do." She sat down across from me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. For the first time in a long while, I couldn't read her. There was no anger, no sadness, just this eerie calm that put me on edge. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, her voice almost too composed. "You've made your point. You cheated to hurt me, to get back at me. So now what? Where do we go from here?" I stared at her, not sure how to answer. I hadn't thought that far ahead. In my head, I imagined this confrontation playing out differently, her breaking down, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. But this wasn't that. Jessica wasn't about to let me off easy. I don't know, I admitted, my voice flat. I guess I just wanted you to understand what it feels like. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. And do you feel better now? Does it feel good, Ethan? Because let me tell you something, it doesn't make you any less of a fool. Her words stung, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't trying to fix anything, Jess. I just wanted to stop feeling like the only one losing in this. Jessica shook her head, laughing bitterly. You think this is a game? That we're keeping score? God, you really don't get it, do you? I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to speak. She wasn't wrong. I had turned our entire relationship into a sick game of revenge, and now we were both spiraling into the chaos we'd created. I never thought we'd end up here, she said, softer now. I mean, yeah, I screwed up. I messed around with Alex, and it was stupid. But I thought. I don't know. I thought maybe we could get past it. I could hear the frustration in her voice, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. It wasn't just Alex, Jess. I read the messages. It wasn't just one mistake. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it again. But instead, she just sighed, her shoulders slumping. Yeah, okay. I messed up more than once. I was bored, I was angry, and I didn't care about how it would hurt you. I get that now. But what you did? You didn't just cheat on me, you wanted to break me. You wanted to see me suffer. She wasn't wrong. I hated how right she was. And now what? She continued. You got your revenge. Are we supposed to just go on pretending we can fix this? Because I'm not sure there's anything left to fix. For the first time, I could see it, the end. Not just the end of our marriage, but the end of whatever thread had been holding us together. I didn't want to admit it, but maybe there really wasn't anything left. What do you want, Jess? I asked, feeling that same numbness creep in again. Do you want out? She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes drifting away from me, staring at something far off. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more vulnerable than I'd heard in a long time. I don't know, she whispered. Part of me does. But another part of me hates the idea of giving up. After everything, I don't want to be the one who just walks away. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with all the years we had spent building this life together. We had shared so much, good and bad, and now it was all crumbling around us. I don't want to give up either, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. But saying it didn't change the reality. We were broken. And there was no quick fix for the kind of damage we had done to each other. In the days that followed, we danced around each other, barely speaking. There was no yelling, no more big confrontations, just silence. And in that silence, I started to realize something, we had both lost. Jessica had lost her grip on control, on her image of being the one in power, and I had lost, well, I wasn't even sure what I had lost. Maybe my sense of self, my trust in her, my belief in love. After that heart-wrenching conversation, I thought we'd reached some kind of quiet limbo. The air between us was thick with tension, but no one was making any sudden moves. I was emotionally drained, and if I'm being honest, I thought we were headed for the slow death of our marriage. I figured we'd coast along in silence until one of us finally pulled the plug. But then, Jessica did something I wasn't expecting. About a week after our talk, she started acting different. At first, it was subtle, she was more polite, more attentive. She wasn't picking fights or making passive-aggressive comments like she usually did after an argument. If anything, she was calm. Too calm. I didn't trust it. This wasn't the Jessica I knew. One night, she made dinner, something she hadn't done in months. She sat across from me at the table, looking relaxed, even smiling a little. It felt strange. Like we were pretending to be the couple we used to be, before everything fell apart. Part of me wanted to enjoy it, to pretend for just one night that things were normal again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. "Ethan," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About what's happened. Here we go," I thought. She's going to ask for a separation. Maybe even drop the divorce bomb right here over spaghetti. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I know I hurt you. And I know you hurt me, too. We've both done some pretty terrible things. But I've been talking to someone, a therapist." That caught me off guard. "A therapist?" I asked, genuinely surprised. She nodded. "Yeah, I needed someone to help me make sense of all of this. I realized that I was angry, at you, at myself, at everything. And I did stupid things because I didn't know how to deal with it. But now I'm trying to figure out what I really want. I didn't know how to respond." This was a new side of Jessica, one that I hadn't seen before. She wasn't blaming me, she wasn't deflecting, she was taking ownership, and it threw me off completely. "And what do you want?" I asked cautiously, afraid of what her answer might be. She looked me straight in the eye. "I want to try. To actually try and fix this. I don't know if we can, but I don't want to walk away without giving it everything we've got." I wasn't expecting that. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after we both betrayed each other in ways that felt impossible to come back from. And yet, there she was, laying it all out on the table, her willingness to fight for something that felt shattered beyond repair. I sat there, stunned, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell her that it was too late, that we'd already crossed lines we couldn't uncross. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for over a decade, felt a flicker of hope. Could we really do this? Could we actually rebuild from the ashes? "I don't know if we can fix it," I said honestly. "There's been a lot of damage, Jess. I don't even know where to start." She nodded, her eyes softening. "I know. I don't either. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we have to start over, from scratch. Try to figure out if we even still want the same things." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I let myself imagine it, a new beginning, a second chance. But then, reality hit me. Could I ever truly forgive her? Could I move past what she'd done, and could she forgive me for what I'd done in return? "I need to think about it," I said, feeling the weight of her proposal. "Of course," she replied, her tone understanding. "Take your time. But I just wanted you to know that I'm willing to try." After that conversation, I was more confused than ever. Part of me wanted to believe that we could fix things, that therapy could help us rebuild what we had lost. But the other part of me was still haunted by the betrayal, by those nights I knew she had been with someone else, and by the way I had sought revenge. But Jessica wasn't done surprising me. A few days later, she made another move I didn't see coming. She suggested we go to therapy together, couples counseling. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and it was clear she was serious about wanting to repair what had been broken. I didn't know how to feel about it. I had already detached myself emotionally, already accepted that we might be over. But now, she was pulling me back in, offering me a way out of the wreckage. The decision wasn't easy. I went back and forth in my mind, weighing everything we had been through, everything we had lost, against the slim chance that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. In the end, I agreed. I told her I'd go to therapy with her, but I wasn't making any promises. It was the first step, but I had no idea where it would lead us. Maybe we'd find some kind of resolution, or maybe we'd just realize that we were too far gone. Either way, I knew that things were going to change, one way or another. So, I agreed to go to therapy with Jessica, though I was far from convinced it would work. After everything we'd been through, it felt like we were trying to put a band-aid on a bullet wound. Still, there was a part of me, buried beneath all the anger and betrayal, that wanted to believe it could help. Maybe we could find a way forward, or at least get some kind of closure. Our first session was awkward, to say the least. We sat in the therapist's office, across from each other, avoiding eye contact like two strangers forced into a room together. Jessica was the first to speak, diving into how things had gone wrong between us, how we'd lost the connection that once held us together. She admitted to her affair with Alex, but she was careful with her words, focusing more on her reasons for straying rather than the actual details of what had happened. Listening to her, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. I wanted to interrupt, to throw in the fact that it wasn't just Alex, that she'd had other connections, too, but I held back. This wasn't the place to turn it into another shouting match. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it all out. I told the therapist about the betrayal, how I had found the messages, how I had confronted her. And then, I confessed what I'd done in return. I admitted to sleeping with Rachel, to using the affair as a way to hurt Jessica. It felt strange, saying it out loud in front of someone else, but I wanted the therapist to have the full picture. Jessica's face tightened when I mentioned Rachel. It was clear that even though she had been the first to betray me, she wasn't over what I had done in return. There was a silent tension in the room that you could cut with a knife. The therapist listened carefully, asking questions here and there but mostly letting us talk. She had this calm, understanding demeanor that made it easier to open up. After we both shared our sides, she finally spoke. "You've both caused each other a great deal of pain," she said softly. "But before we can even think about moving forward, you need to ask yourselves, is there still enough love here to rebuild? Are you willing to forgive each other, not just for what's been done, but for what might come as you work through this?" The room went silent. I didn't know the answer. Did I still love Jessica? Could I forgive her, and could she forgive me? It was like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, and we had to decide whether we wanted to jump into the unknown together or go our separate ways. As the sessions went on, I started to see sides of Jessica that I hadn't seen in years. She was vulnerable in a way I wasn't used to. She admitted to feeling trapped in the marriage, like she had lost herself along the way. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it gave me some insight into why she had sought comfort elsewhere. I, too, had to confront some hard truths. I realized I had been emotionally distant, especially in the months leading up to her affair. I had been so focused on my own work, my own life, that I hadn't noticed how far apart we had drifted. It didn't make her actions right, but I couldn't deny my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. There were moments in those sessions where I thought maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. But then, there were other moments when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. We were like two people trying to put together a puzzle, but half the pieces were missing. One night, after a particularly intense therapy session, Jessica and I sat in the car outside the therapist's office, neither of us saying a word. The silence between us felt like a ticking time bomb. I knew we were both thinking the same thing: could we really fix this? Was it worth the effort, or were we just delaying the inevitable? Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words hit me harder than I expected. After everything she had done, after all the lies and betrayal, she was the one struggling with forgiveness. But as much as it stung, I understood. We had both crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "I don't know if I can forgive you either," I admitted, my voice tight with emotion. "But I'm willing to try, if you are." She nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes. We both knew that trying didn't guarantee anything. The damage was deep, and neither of us could be sure we'd ever fully heal from it. And then came the bombshell. At our next session, Jessica revealed something that I hadn't seen coming. Something that changed everything. I didn't tell you the whole truth, she said, her voice trembling. About Alex, it wasn't just a one-time thing. I stared at her, my heart sinking. I thought I had known the full extent of her betrayal, but apparently, I was wrong. It went on for months, she continued, her eyes filling with tears. And I wasn't just seeing him. There were others. The room felt like it was spinning. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Others? How many? How long had this been going on? I had known she wasn't being fully honest, but hearing her admit it, right there, in front of the therapist, felt like being hit by a freight train. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process the fact that this wasn't just an affair. This was a pattern, a life she had been living behind my back. The therapist intervened, trying to keep us calm, but I wasn't hearing her anymore. All I could hear was Jessica's confession replaying in my head, over and over again. This wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. This was about survival. About figuring out whether I could stay in a marriage that had been built on so many lies. I'll leave it here for now. I need to gather my thoughts before diving into what happened next, because, believe me, it got even messier from here. In the next part, I'll tell you how I reacted to the full scope of her betrayal, and how everything I thought I knew came crashing down in a single moment. Stay tuned. When Jessica dropped that final bombshell in therapy, that it hadn't just been Alex, but others too, something inside me finally broke. It was like all the fight I had left drained out of me in that moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I just felt done. I remember sitting there, staring at her, not even able to muster up the energy to yell or cry. There were no more words left between us. We had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. There was no coming back from this. The therapist asked me how I felt, but I couldn't even answer. What was the point? What more was there to say? The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, wasn't the same person sitting in front of me anymore. Or maybe she was, and I just hadn't seen it until now. Either way, it didn't matter. Our marriage wasn't salvageable. It had been over long before we sat down in that therapist's office. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't say much, just told Jessica I needed space. She didn't try to stop me. I think she knew, in her heart, that this was the end. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with a friend while I sorted things out. I filed for divorce, and even though Jessica didn't contest it, it was still a long, painful process. She sent me a few messages, mostly apologizing, saying she was sorry for how things had turned out. But by then, I didn't care. I didn't need her apologies. I just needed to move on. The divorce was finalized a few months later. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new. That's where Sarah comes into the picture. I had known Sarah for a while, she worked in a different department at my job, and we'd crossed paths a few times over the years. After everything that happened with Jessica, I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't looking for anything really. But Sarah came into my life at a time when I needed someone who wasn't tied to all the pain and betrayal. She was kind, patient, and had this lightness about her that I hadn't felt in so long. We started talking more, just casually at first, but those conversations turned into long walks after work, grabbing coffee on weekends, and eventually, something more. Sarah wasn't just a distraction from my pain, she became my peace. She reminded me that there was life after Jessica, that I could still find happiness even after everything I'd been through. It wasn't easy at first. I had my guard up, terrified of being hurt again. But Sarah never pushed me. She let me take things at my own pace, and little by little, I started to open up. I started to believe in love again, in trust again. Fast forward a couple of years, and Sarah and I are still together. She's brought so much joy back into my life. We laugh, we travel, we just enjoy each other. I don't feel like I'm walking on eggshells or waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's just easy, in the best way possible. As for Jessica, well, I haven't heard from her in a long time. The last I heard, she's still trying to pick up the pieces of her life. Some mutual friends told me she's been struggling, dealing with the fallout of her choices. From what I've heard, she regrets how things turned out. Maybe she thought I'd always be there, that I wouldn't leave no matter what she did. But life doesn't work that way. You can't keep hurting people and expect them to stick around forever. I don't take any pleasure in knowing she's grieving or struggling. Honestly, I don't think about her much anymore. I've moved on, and I've found someone who loves me the way I deserve to be loved. Life after betrayal is messy, it's painful, and it's hard. But it's also full of new beginnings, of hope, of finding joy again when you least expect it. I didn't think I'd ever feel whole after what Jessica did to me, but here I am, happy, loved, and at peace. That's the real ending to this story. Not the betrayal, not the revenge, but the realization that life goes on, and sometimes, it gets even better than you ever imagined.